The depot yard is cold enough that the metal punch feels sharper than it should in your palm, and the rails give back a faint damp smell before dawn. Around you, Milan is still mostly dark, with only a few lamps, a little stable warmth lingering in old corners, and the quiet clink of coins being counted into a leather bag. A tram conductor begins his day before the city quite remembers itself, checking the ticket rolls, the cap badge, the lantern, and the route board that must say the correct thing to strangers. It is not really a job of driving, but of keeping a moving room in order. He watches steps, fares, hands on the rail, and the small pause that tells you whether someone means to board or only to ask a question. This morning, though, the timetable has been revised, and the route numbers have shifted just enough to trouble ordinary habits. Passengers will blame the uniform they can see, not the office that printed the notices. So before the first car leaves the yard, he quietly sets himself to memorizing each altered stop, each likely confusion, and each explanation he will have to repeat. If you stay with him for a little while, you can hear how a whole city once depended on this nearly forgotten kind of patience. The paper notice is pinned crookedly in the depot office, and that alone tells you how late it arrived. An inspector, still buttoning his coat, reads the changes in a tired voice, while the men stand close enough to smell wet wool and lamp smoke. 2 route numbers have been shifted. One branch line now turns earlier, and a market stop has been renamed to match the new municipal wording. It sounds small when spoken indoors, but you can already feel the trouble in it. A conductor lives by repeated paths, by the mercy of habit, by the fact that passengers usually know where they are going before they ask. This morning, that habit has been nudged sideways, so he takes the folded sheet and reads it again under the depot lamp, tracing the altered sequence with one gloved finger. He says the stops quietly to himself, not to memorize the map of the city, but to memorize the questions. At Porta Genova, someone will ask whether the old number still reaches the market. At the covered arcade, a clerk will insist the board yesterday said something different. Near the workshops, a woman with 2 parcels will want to know if her transfer still counts after the revision. Because he knows this, he makes a small decision before the first bell is ever touched. He tucks a worn pencil and a narrow pocket notebook beside the fare rolls, though no one has asked him to keep notes. If confusion grows, he wants a place to pin it down before memory softens the edges. That private choice is simple, almost invisible, and it will follow him through the rest of the day. Outside again, the car assigned to the first run waits under a skin of dew, the varnished wood dull in the half-light. The driver is already there, shoulders tucked against the cold, checking the controller with the settled economy of a man who has done the same motions too many mornings to count. Between them, there is not much need for speech. The driver minds current, brake, and pace. The conductor minds everyone else. He climbs aboard and begins the small ritual that makes a public vehicle ready to become, for an hour at a time, a room full of strangers. The ticket rack is tested first. He turns each roll with his thumb, feeling for snags in the paper. Then the punch, heavier than it looks, with its little jaws ready to bite a shape into each fare. Then the leather coin bag, divided by touch more than sight, where coppers, nickel, and silver must be found quickly in a moving car without fumbling. He checks the destination board next, because words mounted above a window can undo an entire morning. For one relieved second, this car seems correct. Then he looks closer. The route number is new, but the wording beneath it still carries the older destination name, the one passengers knew yesterday. It is not wholly wrong. That makes it worse. A board that is nonsense would be removed at once. A board that is almost right will mislead people one careful mistake at a time. He considers going back into the office. He could ask for a replacement, and perhaps one exists somewhere in the racks behind the clerk's desk. But the yard is already stirring now, and another car is edging toward the gate. If he delays this departure, the line begins the day with a gap before a single fare is collected. So there, in the cold before dawn, he meets the first real choice of the shift: hold the car and argue for a corrected board, or let it run and absorb the confusion himself. he chooses to go. The cause is practical, and the consequence arrives immediately. He tells the driver about the board, taps it once with his knuckle, and says they'll have to answer for it stop by stop. The driver gives the small, resigned look of someone who has learned that the city's mistakes usually land first on the nearest pair of working hands. Then the lantern is hooked in place, the bell cord is tested, the gate is opened, and the car leaves the yard with a low electric hum that feels almost shy in the sleeping streets. Milan before sunrise is not silent, but it is divided into pockets of sound. A milk cart rattles somewhere beyond a row of dark facades. A bakery door opens and lets out one breath of warmth. Farther off, hooves strike stone where older traffic still keeps its own slower rhythm beside the wires overhead. From the rear platform, the conductor sees the city waking in layers, window by window, lamp by lamp. Shop shutter by shop shutter, and with every stop, his work moves farther from preparation and deeper into public repetition. The first passengers are men who already know how to board without being told. They step up with lunch tins, rolled collars, and the calm stiffness of people not yet ready to speak. He names the fare, takes the coin, tears the ticket, clips it cleanly, and returns change before the car has fully settled back into motion. The motions are close to music when the line is working well. Palm open, coin received, ticket torn, punch pressed, change counted, hand to rail, eyes to step, a moving room kept in order. Then comes the first interruption the revised timetable has prepared for him. At a corner where a gas lamp still burns weakly, a man in a dark city coat boards and points at the destination board, without sitting down. This still goes to the market square, yes. The conductor answers with the first explanation of the day, yes, but under the new route number, and not by the old branching turn. The man frowns, glances back at the street as if the pavement itself ought to confirm the matter, and asks whether the municipal notice was posted at his stop. The conductor doesn't know. He says what he does know, because certainty in small pieces is more useful than guesswork dressed as authority. The line has been revised since yesterday. He can remain aboard to the covered market, but if he needs the older branch, he'll change at the next interchange. The man pays, but with the air of someone paying a rule rather than a person. That distinction matters more than it seems. It means the conductor has solved the moment without earning trust. 2 stops later, the board begins its quiet damage. A pair of women carrying baskets get on together, breathing hard from the walk. They have seen the old destination wording and boarded expecting the earlier turn. When he explains the new arrangement, one accepts it at once. The other does not. She says her sister rode this line all winter and it never did such a thing. He shows her the revised route card clipped inside the car. She studies it, as if printed paper must somehow confess its own lateness. In the end, she stays aboard, but only after making him promise to tell her exactly where to change. So now he is carrying not only fares, but promises. And promises multiply faster than tickets. At the next halt, a schoolboy asks whether the old number has been abolished entirely. At the one after that, an old man with a cane asks why a public system needs new numbers when the old ones were already understood. Then a seam worker boards with a transfer stub from yesterday afternoon and holds it up before he can even greet her. The color is right for the old route. The hour is stale. The policy is plain enough in theory, but this is still the first morning of a change that has arrived before the city is awake enough to absorb it. He lets her ride to the next junction, takes the old stub, and marks in his notebook where she boarded. There is another small decision there. He could enforce the rule hard and early. Instead, he chooses lenience for now because a line under revision runs better on explanation than on punishment. That choice keeps the car moving. It also plants later trouble because every exception teaches someone what to expect next. By the time the eastern sky begins to pale behind the roofs, the tram is no longer a nearly empty shell. It has become what it will remain for most of the day, a narrow vessel of damp sleeves, hat brims, parcel string, and breath against glass. The windows fog low first, where seated riders warm them, then higher, until the city outside seems to pass in smudged watercolor shapes. Inside, the conductor moves by memory and balance. He knows where the floorboards flex. He knows which rail to take when the car rounds a particular bend. He knows how to brace his knees while making change with one hand and steadying himself with the other. He also knows that passengers watch him only when they need something. When they are settled, he vanishes into his own usefulness. That, too, is part of the job. A driver may be noticed when the car jolts or stops. A conductor is noticed when there is uncertainty. So on a morning like this, one, he cannot help but be seen more than usual, and not in a way that grants him much shape as a person. To most riders, he is not a man with cold fingers and memorized stops. He is simply the uniform nearest the problem. At a busier stop near a row of workshops, the first true knot forms. 4 men board quickly, speaking over one another. 2 believe this car still takes the old direct route. 1 wants the renamed municipal stop and uses the former street name instead. The last only wants to know whether his transfer will be accepted on the cross line if the number has changed. Each question delays the next hand reaching for the fare bag. Each answer requires another. The conductor solves it as best he can. 2 men remain aboard. 1 steps back down, muttering that the city makes maps for clerks and inconveniences for workers. The man with the transfer is told yes if he changes at the proper stage, and because the stop is already crowded and the driver is waiting on the bell, the conductor lets that answer stand without the longer explanation about revised categories. Again, the line moves. Again, the saved seconds become a debt that will be paid later. Now the morning has properly started. Street sellers unfold their stalls. Office porters begin sweeping stoops. More cars appear on intersecting lines, each carrying its own little weather of steam, patience and complaint. The tram's brass fittings warm under so many hands. The floor takes on the smell of wet leather and city grit. Coins pass from glove to glove, some cold, some already warmed by pockets. The conductor clips, counts, reassures, and repeats. This line now goes by the Civic Market entrance. Yes, the old branch has been altered. Yes, your transfer can still be used, but not beyond the designated stage. No, the renumbering was not his idea. He never says the last part aloud, though perhaps everyone hears it anyway. At one stop, a clerk with a newspaper folded under his arm points up at the destination board and says the wording is misleading. The conductor agrees. It is the first time that morning he allows himself that plain honesty. The clerk softens a little at once, as people often do when their irritation is not argued with. He asks whether the depot knows. The conductor says it will know by evening if it doesn't already. That answer has a consequence he did not intend. The clerk, here in calm confidence, decides the matter is manageable and stays aboard. 2 other riders, seeing no larger protest, do the same. And so the mistaken board continues to do its work, not by causing one great scene, but by persuading people to remain inside a confusion the conductor must personally untangle. Near the canal, the car grows crowded enough that he has to begin guiding bodies as carefully as fares. A woman with a basket of greens needs room away from a carpenter's satchel. A young factory hand tries to stand on the rear platform after being told to move inside. A late boarder catches the rail as the driver starts too soon, and the conductor's hand is already there, flat to sleeve, steadying him by reflex. This is what he means when he thinks of the tram as a moving room. It is public, but intimate. Temporary, but orderly. A place where strangers must be arranged gently so no one falls, quarrels, or misses the chance to step down. He rings once for stop, twice for go. He watches the gap between wheel and curb, the swing of a parcel, the indecision in a foot at the bottom step. And through all of it, the revised route keeps tugging at the day like a thread that will not lie flat. A young woman boards near a textile house and asks for the old market stop by its former neighborhood name. He gives her the new one. She repeats the old one. He gives the new one again, then adds the nearby church and fountain so she can anchor it in stone rather than municipal language. That works. A man at the back overhears and immediately asks if the same renaming applies on the western branch. It does not, but now 3 more riders are listening. He answers all of them. He has become, by necessity, part fare collector and part human annotation to the city's paperwork. When there is finally a small pocket of calm between stops, he opens his notebook against the ticket rack and writes only a few words. Old board wording, market stop name disputed, transfer uncertainty increasing. The pencil shakes with the motion of the car, making the letters look older than the morning. He closes the book quickly because another stop is arriving, and with it another development he cannot ignore. A man boards holding a printed notice clipped from a newspaper. He reads it aloud in a formal tone that suggests he means to catch the system in contradiction. The notice uses one phrasing. The route board uses another. The conductor's spoken explanation offers a third, because he is translating office language into something ordinary people can use before work. For a moment, all 3 versions hang in the air together. That is when you understand how easily a city can make confusion out of paper. The man demands to know which wording is official. The conductor could argue the municipal notice, he could point to the board, he could claim the authority of uniform and hope the car's impatience carries him through. Instead, he makes the more difficult choice. He says the official wording has changed faster than the signs have. He says the practical truth is where this car actually goes. And he tells the man the exact stop where he should disembark if he wants the market entrance used by traders this morning. Because that answer is useful, it ends the dispute. Because it quietly admits disorder, the riders trust him a little more than they trust the paper. But trust earned this way is tiring. It has to be made again at the very next stop, and the next, and the next. The city centre is nearer now. You can feel it before you properly see it. Boardings become quicker, denser, more expectant. People no longer ask from the pavement if the line is right. They mount the step first and ask while already half committed. That changes the conductor's work. He has less room for long explanations, more need for instant judgment, more faces turning toward him at once. And because the morning's small accommodations have allowed several uncertain riders to continue farther than they first meant to travel, he is now carrying a soft backlog of unsettled fares, remembered promises, and future transfers that have not yet reached the stops where they must be honored. Nothing has broken. That is the difficult part. The route has not collapsed into argument or delay. It is still moving. But it is moving with more obligations inside it than the timetable sheet ever counted. By the time the tram reaches the denser streets near offices and covered stalls, he is no longer simply working the line. Now he is managing density, and density asks for finer judgment than a quiet early run ever does. At the central stops, people don't arrive one by one so much as gather in little weather systems of purpose, each with its own speed. Clerks come in neat coats with exact coins already pinched between fingers, wanting to board, pay, and disappear into thought before the car is moving again. Workshop men arrive in pairs and threes, talking over the bell, their boots leaving a darker track on the floorboards. Women with parcels pause half a second longer at the step, not from uncertainty, but because they are measuring space with their eyes before committing their weight. A conductor learns to read that half second. It tells him whether to wait, whether to offer a hand, whether to call for the people inside to move down before another body enters the narrow aisle. He becomes more voice than person here. A little lift in tone can hurry a hesitant rider without sounding rude. A lowered voice can calm a man who thinks he has been made to wait too long. A gesture of the wrist can do what a longer argument would only delay. The city centre rewards brief clarity. It has no extra room for wounded pride. At one stop near a line of offices, a schoolboy in a stiff collar offers a coin too small for the stage he has ridden. The trick is not new. It is one of those tiny daily negotiations that belong to every public conveyance. The conductor looks at the boy's shoes, the ink stain on his thumb, the almost hopeful straightness in his back. Then he names the correct fare again, not louder, just flatter. The boy sighs, finds the additional centesimi, and pays. Nothing dramatic happens. Still, a choice has been made. If the conductor lets one schoolboy shave a fare in the thick part of the morning, 3 adults will notice before the next corner. So he clips the ticket, hands it over, and the boy vanishes into the standing crowd, already forgetting the face that corrected him. That forgetting comes quickly. It is one of the quiet truths of the work. Riders remember being delayed. They remember being told no. They remember, sometimes, the route number if it inconvenienced them enough. They do not often remember the human being who sorted the inconvenience into something possible. A tram conductor in the 1910s is visible all day and personally retained by almost no one. He is seen in pieces. A gloved hand counting change. A cap badge in fogged glass. A voice saying, "Move down inside, if you please." A punch clipping paper in the same exact place it clipped paper 10 minutes earlier. You could sit opposite him twice in a week and never think you had met him before. That is part of why the job slides so easily out of memory. Its success lies in leaving no residue stronger than a smooth arrival. Near the covered market, where the boarding is always denser, the revised timetable begins to tangle with money in a more stubborn way. Passengers are no longer only asking where the line goes. They are asking what one payment means under the new order. A clerk wants a transfer that would have been ordinary yesterday, but the altered stage boundary now places his destination just beyond the old understanding of one fare. A woman carrying wrapped fabric says she has always changed at this corner without paying again. A soldier on short leave, unfamiliar with the revised numbers, presents a stub from another line and asks if municipal logic has changed since last month, or only the paper has. Each question comes while 3 more people are trying to board. Each answer has to be short enough to fit between the bell and the next stop, and each short answer leaves a fringe of dissatisfaction behind it, because short answers feel like refusal, even when they are accurate. So he begins to keep 2 ledgers at once. One is the official ledger of fares, transfers, stages, and clipped tickets. The other is entirely in his head. That second ledger holds promises, faces, tones of voice, and those little unfinished edges of public contact that may return to him later in the day. The woman with wrapped fabric will need reminding where to change. The clerk may dispute a second fare on the return trip. The soldier, if he boards again, will expect the same explanation in the same words, because consistency is one of the only forms of fairness strangers can recognize quickly. That invisible ledger is what makes the job skilled, not the punch, not the coin bag, not even the route sheet. Those can be taught in order. What takes years is learning how to carry 100 small social obligations through a moving box of wood and brass without dropping the atmosphere itself. The atmosphere matters. If a tram feels orderly, riders forgive a surprising amount. They stand closer. They wait 1 stop longer. They accept that rain has slowed things, or that a market wagon has blocked the rails, or that a municipal office has altered numbers no one asked to have altered. But if the atmosphere tips toward irritation, every ordinary friction sharpens. A basket brushes a coat and becomes an insult. A delayed transfer becomes theft. A request to move inside becomes a personal slight. This is why he watches faces as carefully as tickets. A regular rider near the back catches his eye and taps the overhead rail once with a gloved finger. It is a tiny signal, one of those unspoken exchanges that grow on a route over months. The signal means there is still room inside, though the platform looks full. The conductor nods, shifts 2 men half a step to the left, tells a porter to turn his lunch tin sideways, and 3 more riders fit without complaint. There is craft in that. No office files it. No municipal report will mention how many mornings a line was saved from delay by one conductor, knowing which regulars can be relied on to compress themselves without argument. But this is the texture of the work. It is built from dozens of modest recognitions. 1 more second for the elderly man with the cane. No extra second for the young clerk pretending not to hear the bell. A different tone for the woman anxious about the renamed stop than for the boys trying to crowd the rear platform because they enjoy the draft. He knows who needs firmness and who only needs translation. At the next stop, a middle-aged woman carrying two hatboxes boards awkwardly, not because the packages are heavy, but because the car is full enough to make turning difficult. He takes one box from her just long enough to get her inside. He is not a porter, and strictly speaking, the gesture is not necessary to the fare. But if she blocks the step for 6 seconds while adjusting her grip, the whole queue behind her hardens into annoyance. So he smooths the moment with his hands before it can become a dispute with his voice. She thanks him once absently, already looking for a place where the boxes won't be crushed. By the next stop, she is simply another passenger, and he is again the uniform that made a passage possible. A little later, one of the clerks asks his name. The question is so unusual that it almost slows him. He tells him. The clerk nods politely, then asks whether the cross line at the arcade still departs from the same side of the street. The name was only a bridge to the practical question. Once the answer is given, it evaporates. This is not unkindness. It is just the economy of urban life. People take what information the moment requires and carry only that much away. The conductor feels this without bitterness, perhaps because the job itself teaches the same economy. He does not need the names of most riders either. He needs their intentions. He needs to know who is about to step down, who is likely to challenge a transfer, who has boarded in haste and will realize too late that the new route no longer follows the old habit. Still, somewhere under all the repetition, a quiet understanding settles in him. The electric tramway will be remembered as progress. Its routes, its expansion, its wires, its municipal maps, its speeches about modernity, all of that can be archived neatly. But the labor of making each adjustment tolerable, one confused passenger at a time, has nowhere permanent to rest. That thought does not arrive as sadness. It comes more like a draft around a window frame. You notice it, then keep working. At a stop beside a row of fabric shops, a man with a strong voice insists that his transfer should carry him further because the renumbering has forced him to change cars where he did not have to change before. The argument has logic. That is what makes it difficult. The conductor cannot dismiss him as mistaken. Under the old arrangement, the man's memory is mostly right. But the printed stages have changed, and the fare boundary now falls a little sooner. Several nearby riders begin listening. No one loves a fare dispute, yet everyone is drawn to one because public rules are most vivid when they are challenged aloud. The conductor chooses his words carefully. He does not say the company requires it. That would make him sound like a wall. He says the line has been altered, and the transfer is honored only to the new interchange. Then he adds softly that many people have been caught by the same change this morning. That sentence does useful work. It tells the man he is not uniquely foolish. It also tells the listeners that this confusion already has a pattern. The man pays the additional amount, but not gladly. The coin lands in the leather bag with the flat sound of resignation. The conductor tears the ticket, and when there is a spare moment, writes in his notebook. Transfer complaint. Fabric shop stop. Old habit stronger than revised stage. The note is brief, almost skeletal. Yet it matters. He has begun collecting evidence, not only for the office, but for his own sense of what this day actually contains. Printed notices tend to make changes look clean. A notebook written on a swaying platform records their texture. Near noon, the car grows warmer in a stale way. Wet coats begin to steam less and simply hold their dampness. The brass pole near the center has the dulled shine of many hands. Window glass carries fingerprints where riders have cleared little circles to watch for their stops. The floor has taken on a paste of mud, grit, and softened paper fibers from dropped ticket corners. This is the hour when routine can either deepen into calm or fray into pettiness. The conductor keeps it on the calmer side by narrowing his speech. He starts using the same exact phrases more often. Move down inside, please. Exact fare if you have it. The old branch now changes at the next junction. Yes, this still serves the market, but by the civic entrance. Repeated phrases are not laziness. They are tools. Each one has been trimmed by use until it carries the maximum clarity in the fewest syllables. A conductor who improvises too much spends himself before the afternoon. A conductor who repeats well can last. At one of the busiest central platforms, a flower seller boards with bundles tied in damp paper. The smell arrives before she is fully inside. Green stems, wet string, a little crushed petal sweetness under the heavier odor of wool. The bunches are wider than she remembers them being when she left home, because every object grows in size when placed among other bodies. He finds a narrow place for her near the front, away from a man carrying a crate of small tools. Then, as he reaches for her fare, a regular rider quietly tells him that two boys at the rear have not paid. He does not turn sharply. Quick turns create theater. He moves back through the aisle as if checking the general crowd, and there they are, trying to look as though invisibility might still be available to them. One is bold, one is worried. He can sort them at a glance. He asks, in the same tone he might use for anyone, where they boarded. The bold one names a stop farther back than the worried one expected, and the worried one flicks his eyes sideways. That is enough. The conductor names the proper fare from the actual boarding point. Again, no speech about honesty, no lecture. The crowd does not need a morality play. It needs the matter settled before the next stop. They pay. The regular rider goes back to looking out the window. No one thanks anyone. Order has been restored in the way such order usually is, impersonally, efficiently, almost without leaving a mark. Yet the conductor has spent a little more of himself in the doing of it. That expenditure accumulates, not as drama, as fatigue of attention. You can stand for hours. You can clip tickets by habit. But attention, true social attention spread across a car full of needs, has its own weight. By the time the noon bells from distant churches begin to drift through the wet air, he feels the weight in his shoulders more than in his legs. There is still no collapse. The line still appears ordinary from the street. Pedestrians see a passing tram, hear the bell, and assume the machinery of the city is functioning as intended. They cannot see the morning's backlog inside the conductor's mind, the promised explanations, the half-resolved transfers, the private notes tucked in a notebook warmer now from his body than from the weather. Then, at a stop near the busier commercial quarter, the soft irregularity of the morning hardens into policy. A supervisor boards. He is not grand. No polished arrival announces him. He simply steps up with the familiarity of someone used to being accommodated by uniforms. His coat is better cut than the conductor's coats, but still damp at the hem. He nods to the driver, then to the conductor, and stays near the platform rather than sitting. That alone tells you he has come with instructions. A complaint has reached more than one line, he says quietly. Too many conductors have been accepting old understandings of transfers during the revised morning runs. The new rule is to be enforced immediately, not tomorrow when notices are clearer, not by next week when the city is settled, immediately. He says it in the tone of a man passing on a decision made elsewhere. There is no anger in it. That may be the most tiring part. If he were angry, the conductor could resist him in feeling at least. But the supervisor is simply administrative. He is carrying the office into the car. The conductor asks one practical question. Will the office honor morning leniency where riders were already told otherwise? The supervisor gives a little shrug. That means no promise has been offered in that direction. From this stop onward, the revised transfer colors and stage limits are to be observed strictly. He taps the folded notice in his pocket as if that settles the matter. Then he steps down at the next corner to repeat the same instruction on another car. The whole exchange lasts less than 2 minutes. Its effect is much longer, because now the conductor must change character midday. All morning he has been smoothing a municipal revision by bending where possible. He has let one old transfer ride a junction. He has answered practical truth instead of printed strictness. He has treated confusion as something to absorb on behalf of the line. Now he is ordered to become a firmer edge within that same confusion. The riders do not know the order has just changed. They will only feel that the man in uniform who was flexible this morning is less flexible after noon. That shift is dangerous. Public trust is not offended only by rules. It is offended by inconsistency. So he makes another small decision, one that will shape the next hours. He will obey the order exactly, but he will explain every refusal in the gentlest way his breath allows. That is not rebellion. It is the only room left to him. At the very next stop, the test arrives. A seamstress boards with a transfer of the wrong color, folded so neatly, it is obvious she has done this route many times before. Her cuffs are darkened from work. There is a faint chalk mark on one sleeve. She offers the slip with the confidence of habit. He looks at it, then at her face, already expecting easy passage. All morning he would have taken it to the junction, now he cannot. He tells her that under the revised rule, that color no longer covers this stage. She blinks once, not understanding the sentence so much as hearing a familiar world fail to match it. She says she came the same way yesterday. He says yes, but the route has changed since yesterday morning. He keeps his tone level, almost soft. The softness helps, but only a little. She asks whether she must pay again for the city's decision. It is not really a question for him. Still, he is the one standing in front of it. He says that for this section, yes. A few riders nearby look down with that practiced public politeness people wear when they do not want to witness another stranger's inconvenience too directly. The seamstress pays. Not angrily. Worse than that, tiredly. The ticket is clipped, the car moves on, and something in the atmosphere has shifted. A stricter line has entered the room. The conductor feels it at once. His explanations now land against a little more resistance, because the riders can sense rule where earlier they sensed accommodation. At the next major stop, an elderly man presents no transfer at all, only his memory. He says, with the complete assurance of long habit, that he has always crossed from the old branch onto this line without another fare if he boards before the square. In the history of his own body, this is true. He has likely done it so many times that the act has become as thoughtless as turning left at a corner. The conductor would like nothing more than to honor that body memory and keep the peace. But the supervisor's instruction is still fresh as wet ink. So he explains the new boundary. The old man shakes his head once, as if refusing not the fare but the century itself. Then he reaches slowly into his coat and produces the coins. No one complains loudly. That makes the thing sadder in its own small way. People do not always protest when rules change around them. Often they simply surrender an extra coin and adjust their idea of the city by one resigned degree. A few stops later, a cluster of workers crossing between lines argue more vigorously. Their lunch tins knock softly against their knees as they speak. One insists the city changed things too quickly. Another says the notices were posted where office men would see them, not where laborers changing shifts would stand long enough to read. The conductor suspects this is partly true. He also knows that agreeing too openly would only sharpen the dispute, so he answers in his new, careful formula. The line has been revised. The transfer remains valid to the designated interchange only. Beyond that point, a new fare is due. He says it once. Then again, in simpler words. Then, one more time, naming the actual stop where validity ends. The repetition calms one man and irritates another. But eventually the money appears. Always, eventually, the money appears, or the rider steps down. That is how systems survive. Not because everyone approves, but because movement is usually worth more to people than argument. Even so, the cost is not only in centesimi. Each refusal leaves a thin film over the next exchange. The conductor must keep clearing that film away with tone, posture, and brevity. He stands a little straighter. He avoids sighing where anyone can hear. He makes sure his eyes stay on the person speaking, because looking past someone during refusal feels like contempt, and contempt can sour a whole car. This is social labor in its most repetitive form, not dramatic persuasion, not eloquence. Just patient, exact framing of disappointment so it causes the smallest possible disturbance. And yet, if a complaint is later written, it will not describe this careful framing. It will say only that the conductor refused an old transfer. In the complaint book, he will become a generic barrier. The man who softened the rule as much as language allowed will disappear behind the phrase, "The conductor said no." That anonymity arrives before the day is over. At a stop near the arcade, a gentleman with a tidy moustache refuses to pay the added fare until he has the conductor's badge number. The request is legal enough. The conductor gives it. The gentleman copies the number into a pocket diary as carefully as if he were noting a legal claim on a parcel. Then he pays anyway because the car is moving and because his office is still several stops ahead. That is how many of these conflicts end. Not with resolution, only with continuation. The conductor tears the fresh ticket, hands it over, and says where the revised transfer will still be honored. The man gives no answer. He folds the ticket once and turns toward the window, already converting annoyance into a story he will tell later, perhaps at a desk, perhaps over lunch, perhaps in a complaint written in a hand much tidier than the exchange itself. And if that complaint reaches the depot office, it will likely mention the badge number. It may mention the revised rule. It will not mention the way the conductor kept his tone even. It will not mention that he had already spent half a morning carrying the confusion of the system before being told to harden it. Paper almost never records the manner of a refusal, only its fact. By early afternoon, the stricter transfer rule has settled into the car like a new draft under an old door. People feel it before they fully understand it. They board with more questions prepared. They hold their stubs out sooner. Some present them with little defensive speeches already attached, as if hoping to outrun denial by explaining themselves first. The conductor listens, because interrupting a rider too early makes every rule feel personal. But he has also learned that long sympathy can delay a stop more effectively than open argument, so he trims each answer close. This transfer is valid to the interchange only. Yes, that changed this morning. No, the old branch no longer carries through on one fare. The phrases are firm now, but not cold. He is trying to preserve the skin of civility over a line that has been redrawn under everyone's feet. A widow in a dark hat asks if her daughter, who rides later in the day, will need new instructions. A porter with flour on his sleeve says the route card at his stop still uses the old wording. A bookkeeper wonders whether yesterday's booklet of prepaid ride chits will be reissued under the new numbering. The conductor can answer some of this. The rest he can only absorb. That, too, is part of the forgotten work. A public system emits uncertainty in all directions, and the nearest worker becomes the place where those uncertainties are handed back. He is not only taking fares, he is receiving the city's unfinished explanations. At a quieter stretch between busier streets, he opens his notebook again and braces it against the ticket case. His pencil is shorter now. He writes with the cramped pressure of a man working on a moving surface. Badge number requested at arcade. Wrong color transfers after noon, causing repeated disputes. Signage still old at Flower Porter stop. He adds one more line beneath those. Morning lenience now creating afternoon resentment. That last note is less factual than the others, but it feels true in his hand. A change in policy is difficult enough. A change in policy at midday is harder because memory has already begun forming around the earlier pattern. Several riders now feel not merely confused, but contradicted. The conductor knows this because they say things like, "But this morning." That phrase returns to him again and again. "But this morning another conductor let me pass. But this morning I was told the old color was acceptable to the square. But this morning no one said there would be a second fare from here." And every time he hears it, he has to answer without criticizing his fellow workers, without challenging the supervisor's order, and without pretending the riders imagined the difference. So he answers in the one safe way left. This morning there was temporary lenience while the revision began. Now the office requires the new rule, Even that wording is a small kindness. Temporary lenience sounds more deliberate than confusion. It gives the morning a shape the system did not really have, and perhaps this protects everyone a little. The driver notices the changed mood before speaking of it. At first, there is only a longer silence between bell pulls. Then, at a layover no longer than a minute, he leans half back and says, "They are losing time all along the line." He does not say it accusingly. It is a statement offered like weather. Each disputed fare, he says, costs half a minute or more. Half a minute is nothing in a room. On a tram route repeated across an afternoon, it becomes spacing. Spacing becomes bunching. Bunching means one car too full and the next one too empty. Then riders blame the entire line for irregularity that began in a handful of arguments over slips of paper. The conductor nods. He already knows this in his bones. He can feel the stops stretching not by much, but enough. At corners where they should see open track, there is sometimes the faint outline of another tram farther ahead than expected. At one stop, too many riders are waiting because the previous car arrived late and left some behind. Urban rhythm is delicate. It can be put out of tune by reasons so small most passengers never imagine them. A transfer refused, a board not changed, one clerk arguing while 6 others watch. This is why the conductor makes another decision. He cannot alter the rule. He cannot change the signs himself, but he can shorten the explanations without losing their courtesy. So he begins to refine his language even further, shaving away every extra phrase. Where he had said, "The line has been revised since this morning and the transfer remains valid only to the designated interchange," he now says, "revised today, valid to the interchange only." Where he had said, "Yes, I understand the old route carried farther, but this color no longer covers the present stage," he now says, "Old route ended there, this slip ends here." The phrases are plainer, a little harder, but they are quicker. And because they are repeated exactly, they begin to act almost like posted notices spoken aloud. The car hears them enough times that other riders start anticipating the answer before the question is finished. That has a strange effect. It makes the conductor more efficient. It also makes him less distinct. A man with practiced phrases becomes almost part of the tram itself, like the bell or the door latch. He is not less human, in fact, only less visible as a person. Efficiency has that habit. The better repetitive work is done, the more invisible its effort becomes. Rain comes sometime after this, not with a storm's drama, but with the slow certainty of a Milan afternoon turning inward. You first notice it in the windows. What was fog becomes streak. What was damp stone outside darkens by degrees. Then umbrellas begin appearing at stops, black and brown and poorly folded, their wet ribs catching at sleeves and hat brims as people board. Rain changes every practical detail of the line. Stepboards go slick. Mud climbs onto the floor faster. Coins feel colder, then warmer, then uncertain in wet fingers. Paper tickets soften at the corners. The air inside thickens with wool, wet leather, and the faint iron smell that comes when rain touches the city's rails and hardware. The conductor's work grows more physical at once. He places one hand nearer the platform rail when riders climb aboard, not dramatically, just ready. A man stepping onto a dry tram is one problem. A man stepping onto a wet tram while folding an umbrella and looking for exact change is several small problems at once. So the conductor steadies elbows, warns boys not to jump the step, tells a woman to mind her hem, and calls the stops louder because rain on roof and glass blunts the outer landmarks. Passengers miss familiar corners when windows cloud this way. They cannot see the bakery sign. They cannot judge the turn by the church wall. They look up too late and ask, "Was that ours?" Now the conductor is not only enforcing new fare rules, he is replacing the city itself where weather has hidden it. The repeated stop calls become more important than before. Civic Market, Arcade Interchange, Workshop Lane, Canal Crossing. He says them in a measured voice, neither rushed nor theatrical. and each stop lands in the warm, wet car like a peg driven into uncertainty. A young clerk, his collar already wilting, thanks him for calling the stops so clearly. The thanks is brief and almost absent-minded. Still, it is noticed. Not because praise matters greatly to him, but because it confirms the quiet truth of the job. Most of the time, riders only hear the conductor when they need guidance. On rainy days, guidance becomes sound before it is sight. Even a familiar route can feel newly foreign behind blurred glass. At one corner, a woman with a large umbrella hesitates on the platform while trying not to drip on the people already inside. The conductor takes the umbrella by its handle for just a moment, angles it low, and gets her aboard without soaking the nearest seated passenger. Then he returns it folded against her parcels. That tiny act prevents a small annoyance that might otherwise ripple across 3 rows of riders. Again, no one records it. Again, the line proceeds because someone quietly adjusted a human difficulty before it became public friction. Near the rear platform, 2 laborers stamp mud from their boots as if the floor were a yard. He asks them, gently but directly, to step in rather than block the wet entrance. One obeys at once. The other mutters that there's no dry place to stand in any case. The conductor doesn't disagree. He only shifts a fruit basket aside with the owner's permission, creates half a body's worth of space, and the matter ends. This is what the work becomes in rain. Not grand management. Continuous micro-adjustment. Every wet object wants more room than the tram can offer. Every rider wants to remain dry, stable, and unembarrassed. The conductor cannot grant all of that. He can only distribute inconvenience, so no one person receives too much at once. His coin bag behaves differently in the rain too. Leather darkens, the mouth of the pouch sticks slightly. Coins taken from wet gloves have to be sorted more by edge and thickness than by shine. A conductor learns touch in weather. A 5-centesimi piece and a 10 can be known by rim and weight long before they are properly seen. In a crowded wet car, speed of touch matters more than neatness of display. Passengers do not care whether the exchange looks elegant. They care that change arrives before the next lurch, and that no one is kept waiting on a platform because a coin has slipped under a thumb. Damp tickets are another problem. Paper curls, torn edges go ragged. The punch sometimes bites less cleanly through softened stock. When that happens, riders may later claim the mark was unclear and the ticket not properly clipped. So he checks each one with more care than he did in the dry morning, though he does it quickly enough that no one sees the extra attention. He has become efficient at hiding effort. That may be the single most overlooked skill of all. A public worker often succeeds by making labor look smaller than it is. At a stop near a row of machine shops, the driver speaks again, lower this time because the rain has made the whole car feel more enclosed. They are nearly 3 minutes behind the printed schedule. 3 minutes sounds tiny to people not living inside a timetable. To men working a city line, it is the start of a pattern. The car behind may close the gap. Passengers will gather thicker at upcoming stops. Those thicker boardings will produce more questions. More questions will produce more delay. This is how routine work compounds. The conductor glances down the aisle full of umbrellas, bundled coats, softening tickets, and riders whose patience is beginning to shorten around the edges. Then he chooses, with a quiet sort of discipline, to rely on shorter, repeated phrases from this point onward. Not because he wants to be abrupt, because rhythm now matters as much as kindness, so his speech narrows further. Inside, please. Fold the umbrella low, exact change if you can. Transfer valid only to the next junction. Step carefully, mind the rail. These are small phrases, almost domestic in their brevity. They move the car along, and because they are the same every time, riders stop expecting bespoke explanations. They begin to understand that the conductor is now functioning partly as memory aid, partly as moving notice board, partly as clerk of a wet temporary room. The work becomes more efficient. It also becomes less personal. Earlier in the day, he could anchor explanations to landmarks, to church towers, to old neighborhood names, to the habits people carried from yesterday. Now there is less room for that. He is handling flow. Flow has a bluntness to it. At one stop, a regular passenger who usually chats about football grounds or bread prices offers up his fare without trying conversation. The man sees the full car, the rain, the repeated disputes, and senses that today is not for idle words. That small withdrawal of familiarity is no tragedy. Still, it marks the mood. The conductor is doing his work better than before, perhaps, but he is less available as a human texture within it. This too hints at why memory lets such workers go. Their best days often leave the fewest stories. A sloppy conductor creates anecdotes. A skilled one creates continuity. Continuity is useful, calming, and hard to remember later as anything more than things worked. One of the more difficult rainy stops comes near a school, where several children board under the supervision of an aunt whose own umbrella has failed at one rib and keeps threatening to spring open inside the car. Children in wet weather are all elbows, satchels, and sudden turns. He guides them inward one by one, checks that no strap catches the gate, and takes the aunt's coins while also telling a seated gentleman to lift his newspaper clear of a damp shoulder. The whole operation lasts perhaps 15 seconds. It feels longer. Rain stretches every boarding. A simple climb becomes a balancing act. A fare becomes a negotiation between cold fingers. A missed stop becomes more likely because the windows are grey and every block looks briefly like the last. At another corner, a man tries to reuse a transfer already clipped on the earlier stage. Normally, the conductor would have more patience for the explanation. Today he looks once, sees the previous punch and says, "Used already, new fare from here." The man begins to protest. The conductor adds, quietly, before the protest can flower, "Used already, sir, and we're late." There is no insult in it, only a fact linked to the larger rhythm of the route. Perhaps because the rain has made everyone aware of shared inconvenience, the man pays with only one extra breath of complaint. The car moves. Sometimes weather does what authority cannot. It reminds a crowd that delay is a common burden. The conductor continues making notes when he can, though now his notebook pages are beginning to wrinkle near the edges from damp air and wet sleeves. Late by machine shops. Rain increasing missed landmarks. Transfer reuse attempts more frequent after disputes. He writes as if saving not the day exactly, but its grain. The depot office will know how much cash came in. It may know how many complaints were made. It will not know how the rain thickened every explanation unless someone writes it down. He suspects no one has asked many conductors for this kind of detail before. Still, he keeps it. Perhaps because it gives his labor shape beyond the next bell. Perhaps because notes are a way of insisting that difficulty had causes, not just outcomes. Toward the later afternoon, the central crush eases by a degree, not enough to call the car empty. Only enough that you can feel one pocket of air between bodies where before there was none. Shop errands are partly done. Some offices have settled into their indoor hours. The riders now are more mixed. A dressmaker returning from delivery. 2 apprentices smelling faintly of oil. A man with folded newspapers under his arm. The pages darkened at the edges by rain. An older woman carrying a jar wrapped in cloth as carefully as if it were a church relic. This softer crowd allows the work to breathe, but only a little. The route is still running behind. The revised transfer rule still catches people in old assumptions. The destination board, still not corrected, continues to invite one first wrong inference at a time. A young couple board and ask if this goes by the old branch chapel. He says, "Not now, change at the arcade." They look up at the sign, see the old wording and ask why it says otherwise. He answers, "Because the board has not been changed, though the route has." He says it without irritation. They laugh once, not at him, but at the city, and pay. The laughter helps. A shared absurdity can release what argument would only tighten. For the next few stops, he notices riders glancing up at the board with a little less faith than before. Once people learn a sign may lag behind reality, they begin listening more carefully to the human being in front of them. That should grant the conductor more importance. Instead, it grants him more temporary utility. When the sign is finally fixed, the necessity will vanish, and with it, the memory of who translated the old wording into useful action. In late afternoon, the light outside turns the color of damp stone and diluted smoke. Windows reflect the interior more strongly now. From some angles, the conductor sees the car doubled in the glass. Cap badge, hanging straps, tired faces, umbrella handles, the little white flashes of ticket edges. He catches sight of himself only in fragments. A shoulder, a hand with the punch. The side of his face blurred by rain tracks on the pane. That feels fitting. This job is lived in fragments. No one, not even the man doing it, experiences it as one grand coherent action. It is a chain of little completions. Fare taken. Change given. Step watched. Stop called. Dispute eased. Bell rung. Then the sequence begins again. At one of the returning runs from the center, the same gentleman who wrote down the badge number earlier appears once more on the platform. He sees the conductor. The conductor sees him. For a brief second, the day could harden around that recognition. Instead, the gentleman simply presents the proper fare and says he was told by a colleague that the transfer rule has changed on all revised lines. The conductor says yes. The man nods, as if the city's error has now been ratified by enough office conversation to become reality. Nothing more passes between them. That may be the truest kind of resolution this work allows. Not apology, not vindication. Only adaptation. The line keeps moving. As the rainy afternoon lengthens, the conductor's hands begin to feel divided from him. One part of the body works even while another grows dull with repetition. His right thumb finds ticket edges almost without looking. His left hand sorts coins by habit and pressure. His knees prepare for curves before the car leans. This physical memory is what lets him continue speaking clearly when his mind is already carrying too many half-finished encounters. Quiet jobs often depend on this kind of bodily intelligence. Not the intelligence of invention, but of exact recurrence. A practiced worker saves energy by letting the body inherit tasks the mind can no longer afford to supervise closely. That is why an experienced conductor looks calm in conditions that would tangle a new man within an hour. He is not less busy, he is more distributed. The body holds what it can so the voice may remain available. There is another consequence to the shortened phrases, and he notices it near a stop by a pharmacy. A woman asks whether this line still reaches the square by the fountain. He answers, yes, civic entrance now. She nods, boards, pays, and says nothing else. Earlier in the day he might have added, the old stop name is no longer on the municipal card, but it is the same square, only marked differently. That would have reassured her more warmly. Now he gives the efficient version. It works. It leaves no residue. The transaction is clean and almost bloodless. He has become better at reducing uncertainty quickly. He has also become easier to forget within moments of usefulness. That is not a moral failing in anyone. It is the shape of modern routine. Systems reward what disappears into function. And once a worker becomes function, the office can file his day without ever really seeing it. At the later turnings of the line, when the rain has settled into a steady grey curtain, that truth begins to follow him more closely. He is still standing, still clipping, still naming the same altered junctions, but now he is also carrying the knowledge that the depot will receive the day in a very different shape than he lived it. The depot will receive totals. It will receive delays. It will receive complaints, if complaints have been written. It may receive a note about the wrong destination board, but it will not receive the exact pressure of the afternoon, the way every softened ticket had to be checked twice, or the way one tired refusal could spoil the mood of 10 paying riders. So he keeps his own account inside the notebook and in the rhythm of his body, and in the careful economy of the phrases he has trimmed down to survive the rain. By now the route feels older than the day itself. The same corners come again, the same wet facades slide by behind blurred glass. The same market awnings sag underwater, and yet each return is slightly altered by who is on board by which transfer is offered, by whether a parcel catches on a cuff or a child loses sight of a familiar doorway through the fogged pane. Repetition is never complete. That is one of the hidden difficulties of repetitive work. From the street, this car is making the same journey over and over. Inside, no two runs are identical enough to be done by sleep alone. Near a stop by a print shop, a young compositor boards with black ink still faintly lodged in the skin near his thumbnail. He offers exact fare at once, which is always a small blessing. Then he asks, in the clipped tone of someone trying not to seem inconvenienced, whether tomorrow the same transfer limit will apply. The conductor says yes, unless the office issues another change. The compositor gives a brief dry laugh and says, "Then no one will believe the signs until afternoon." It is not a cruel remark, only a practical one. The conductor almost answers more personally than usual. He almost says that believing signs too quickly has been the city's mistake all day. But he does not. He only clips the ticket and says the notices should be corrected by morning. Should be is as far as honesty will let him go. At the next stop, a woman who had boarded earlier taps his sleeve and asks if the pharmacy corner has already passed. The windows are so dim with moisture that she has lost the landmarks entirely. He tells her, one more stop, then rings at the proper moment and waits the extra breath she needs before stepping down with a parcel balanced against her chest. She thanks him in a whisper meant only for him, not because the act was grand, but because missing one stop in the rain can turn an ordinary errand into a wet and awkward walk back. This is the scale on which his labor often matters. Not in speeches, in one stop not missed, in one old man not left uncertain at the wrong square, in one seamstress understanding why she must pay again, even if she does not like it. As the afternoon moves closer to evening, the riders change again. The sharper midday pace gives way to a softer tiredness. Shop clerks, bored with ledgers under their arms, assistants from drapers' shops carry paper parcels tied with string, gone limp from damp air. A baker's helper gets on with flour still ghosted on his cuffs, now turned paste at the edges by rain. An apprentice mechanic smells faintly of oil and wet wool and keeps one careful hand over the wrapped part he is bringing home or across town. People speak less at this hour unless they need directions. Fatigue makes even annoyance quieter. The conductor finds this easier in one sense and harder in another. Quieter passengers leave him more space to hear the bells, the rails, the little catches in boarding. But tired silence also means that when someone does challenge a fare or a route, the whole car listens more distinctly. There is less other sound to hide inside. At a broad stop near the market quarter, a fish seller boards with 2 covered baskets, and the smell arrives before the details of her face. Even through cloth and rain and the many odors of a tram, fresh fish holds its own place in the air. The conductor helps angle the baskets where the aisle remains passable, takes the fare, and warns a man with polished shoes to keep clear of the drip from the wicker. No one complains. That in itself is work. A conductor often prevents complaint not by silencing it, but by arranging objects before discomfort can attach itself to words. A few stops later, one of the morning riders appears again. He is the man who had first asked whether the market square was still served under the new route number. His collar is wilted now. His newspaper is gone. He looks at the board overhead, then at the conductor, and says, almost with weary courtesy, "Still the wrong wording." The conductor says, "Still the wrong wording." The man nods, as if they are now partners in acknowledging the same small municipal failing. Then he asks for the proper transfer point and receives it. There is a softness in that brief exchange that was not available in the morning. Shared repetition has sanded away the rider's earlier insistence. He no longer expects the conductor to embody the system. He expects him only to guide him through it. That may be as much trust as the job usually allows. And yet even this kind of trust is temporary. If tomorrow the sign is corrected, the rider may never think of the conductor again. He will simply board, pay, sit, and arrive, which is to say the work will have succeeded so thoroughly that it vanishes. The line begins to lengthen in shadow now, You can feel evening before the sky fully confesses it. Interior reflections strengthen on the windows. Lamplight outside blooms in the rain, then slides away in yellow streaks. The car's own lamps begin to matter more, turning wet brass warmer than it really is, making faces seem a little more inward, a little more private. Even a public tram grows more intimate after dark begins. People lower their voices. A cough sounds more separate. The click of the punch seems sharper against the quieter air. For the conductor, this hour asks for a different kind of attention. Morning is about absorbing uncertainty before work. Afternoon is about keeping pace under complication. Early evening becomes a period of return. Passengers are heading home, or toward the second half of their day, and their questions tend to be practical in a simpler way. Does this still connect with the line by the canal? Will there be another car after this one? Has the stop by the arcade changed names as well, or only the market stop? These are not disputes so much as efforts to secure the route between one tired point and another. He can answer them well. Fatigue has reduced his language, but not his accuracy. At one end of the line, during a turnaround long enough only to step down, stamp the water from a boot sole, and flex fingers gone stiff around metal and leather, he opens the notebook once more. The page is crowded now. Not with elegant observations, with fragments. Wrong boards still causing repeated wrong boardings. Rain making stop calls necessary at familiar landmarks. Evening riders calmer if answer given in one sentence. That last line interests him a little, not because it is profound, because it is useful. A day like this teaches its own small methods. Morning confusion can tolerate fuller explanation because the car is not yet carrying the weight of the whole city. Afternoon demands compression. Evening rewards a plain sentence and a steady tone. An experienced conductor learns the day as if it were made of weather fronts, each requiring slightly different handling. No manual can quite teach that. The printed timetable is the skeleton. The living shift is flesh and mood and rain, and the speed at which a crowd forgives inconvenience. When they set out again, the route back inward is less crowded, but no less delicate. A few riders board already glazed with end-of-day tiredness. One woman nearly misses her own step because she is looking into her bag for coins before her foot finds the wet platform properly. His hand is there before thought finishes forming. A touch at the elbow, a brief steadying pressure, then release. Nothing is said. That is often the best kind of assistance in public. Enough to prevent embarrassment, not enough to announce it. A pair of shop assistants board together with matching paper packets and talk in low voices about a hemline that was delivered late. They ask whether this car still runs direct to the square by the fountain. He says yes, though the stop now carries the civic name. One of them says she prefers the old name because it sounds like a place where people actually live. The other says the new name sounds like a clerk's drawer. The conductor says nothing to that, but he understands it. Cities change language by office before they change it by habit. Workers like him stand in the gap between the two. All day he has translated official wording into remembered stone, turning municipal labels back into churches, corners, awnings, and market gates. That translation is another form of labor almost certain to leave no trace. Later historians can collect maps, they can date route revisions, they can compare municipal decrees. They will know, perhaps, on which day a stop acquired its formal civic title. What they may not know is that for months, maybe longer, the stop remained known in practice by the old bakery opposite it, or the fountain nearby, or the family name of the corner shop everyone trusted more than the posted board. And they are even less likely to know that a conductor kept both vocabularies alive at once, so riders could continue arriving where they meant to go. Near the arcade, where several lines braid together and the air outside glitters with rain and lamp reflections, he meets the consequence of the afternoon's stricter rule in a quieter form. A woman approaches the platform, sees the crowd inside, checks the transfer in her hand, and then asks before stepping up whether it is still accepted beyond the interchange. There is caution in her voice. She has either been refused once already today, or heard enough from others to know better than to assume. The conductor tells her no, only to the interchange. She steps back down, not angrily, simply decisively. Then she turns and hurries toward another line whose route may cost less trouble. This is a kind of result the office seldom counts. No complaint has been lodged. No raised voice has delayed the car, no improper fare has been accepted, and yet the route has lost a passenger because the network no longer feels legible enough to trust in the rain. Invisible labor often fails invisibly too, not in scenes, in choices quietly diverted before they become visible to records. A little later, a grocer's assistant hands over a transfer and adds, "Before the conductor can inspect it, they told me at the previous car that you'd say no." The phrase is interesting. Not, "you might say no," "you'd say no." As if the whole route has become identified less by destination than by the expected refusal at its middle section. The conductor checks the slip. The previous conductor was right. He says so, but adds where the valid stage ends and which stop offers the shortest walk afterward. The assistant pays, grumbling only slightly. Still, the phrase remains. They told me you'd say no. That is how a working man becomes rumor inside a network. Not by name, by function. At one of the quieter outer stops, he finally gets a few uninterrupted minutes between boardings. The rain eases just enough to become mist on the windows rather than active tapping. The car's interior settles. Someone unwraps a sandwich, and a faint smell of cheese and crust escapes into the warm, damp air. A woman in black gloves closes her eyes for 2 stops without sleeping exactly. The driver keeps them moving at a careful, unshowy pace over rails slick enough to punish impatience. And for a moment, the conductor simply stands with the strap in one hand and the punch resting against his coat, feeling the accumulated weight of the day in the arches of his feet. There is no grand reflection in it, only body knowledge. The coin bag is lighter now, the notebook heavier. His voice has become a little roughened by repeating station names through wet air. His collar has dried and dampened and dried again in alternating patches against his neck. Work settles into the body this way, in layers not dramatic enough to complain of, and too persistent to ignore. At the next terminus, where the pause is slightly longer, he and the driver exchange the kind of practical talk that men in such jobs often reserve for the edges of duty. The driver says the spacing may be restored by the final run if no wagon blocks the central crossing. The conductor says the wrong destination board ought to be changed before tomorrow, or the same questions will breed again at first light. The driver says if the depot has the right board, he does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. Everything in such systems depends partly on stores, partly on clerks, partly on whether someone lower down in the hierarchy can find what a notice higher up has already declared necessary. The conductor taps his notebook pocket and says he has written the issue clearly. The driver gives a small nod. That means writing is something, though perhaps not enough. Then the bell is due again, and conversation folds back into function. This final service inward carries a different company of riders. Some are regulars whose faces have appeared at nearly the same hour for months. A tailor with careful cuffs. An elderly woman who always prefers the same seat if it is free. A messenger boy trying very hard to look older than his years. A bakery worker with a folded cloth over his shoulder, carrying the day home in flour and fatigue. Regulars alter the atmosphere in subtle ways. They know when to stand before their stop. They know how much the car sways at the canal bend. They know the conductor's phrases and often move before he has to say them. This reduces strain. It also reveals skill by its absence. A smooth car full of regulars is not effortless. It is the result of months of repeated contact in which everyone has learned just enough of everyone else's habits to reduce friction. If a stranger were dropped into this moving room, he might think such order natural. The conductor knows it has been built a half second at a time. One regular, the tailor, asks whether tomorrow the market stop will still require changing by the civic entrance. The conductor says yes. Then the tailor asks whether the old branch number is gone entirely. The conductor says yes again, for now. The tailor nods and says, "Then I should tell my sister not to trust the board above the window." There it is again, the public system already being corrected by private conversation. What the office printed late and mounted badly will be repaired, for the moment, by brothers, sisters, clerks, apprentices, market sellers, and all the riders who have spent one damp day teaching one another how the line really behaves. That is how cities often function at ground level, not by decree alone, by informal relay. And people like the conductor are at the center of that relay, while rarely being remembered as its source. After several more stops, the car is quiet enough that he can hear little domestic sounds among strangers. A paper packet being adjusted on a lap, a throat cleared politely behind a glove, the soft tap of a ring against the brass pole as someone shifts their hold, the hum of current, and the wheel noise underneath all of it. This is the hour when the tram feels less like machinery and more like a room everyone is passing through on the way back to private life. The conductor remains public within it. He cannot retreat inward the way the passengers can. He must still see the missed coin, the forgotten umbrella, the transfer presented upside down by bad light, the half-risen rider who thinks the stop has come one corner early. That asymmetry is another hidden part of the job. Everyone else is allowed to become tired. He must remain usable. At a stop near a church, whose facade is now only a dark plain beyond watery lamp glow, an older man boards slowly and offers the exact fare with unusual care. Then he says, almost apologetically, "I argued with another conductor today." The conductor waits. The man continues, saying he was wrong about the transfer boundary, but no one had explained the renumbering clearly where he first boarded. The words are not exactly an apology, more like a need to put the disorder somewhere human before going home. The conductor says it has been a confusing day on many lines. The man nods. He seems relieved less by absolution than by confirmation that the confusion was shared. Then he takes his place and says no more. Even this small exchange will go nowhere beyond itself. No office will hear of it. No record will note that one rider wished to restore his own sense of fairness by admitting error to a different uniform than the one he challenged. But such moments are real. They are part of the true social weather of the system. The final crossings toward the depot side of the city have their own kind of slowness. Not delay exactly. A drawing down. The car empties by degrees. The air changes as wet wool leaves and cooler evening enters each time the door opens. The floorboards become visible again in patches where all day there had only been shoes. A forgotten ticket corner clings damply near the step. One of the hanging straps twists slowly from the motion left by a passenger who has just descended. The conductor begins the small acts of inward preparation that mark the close of service, even before service has fully ended. He counts the remaining ticket strips by touch. He separates transfer stubs that must be handed in from scraps that can be discarded. He checks, when no one is looking, that the pencil is still in the notebook seam and has not been lost to the day. These are not closing rituals yet, only the first signs that the public part of the work is narrowing toward account. At a broad avenue, the fish seller gets off at last, baskets lighter than when she boarded. At the next stop, the tailor descends, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that is not friendship exactly, but repeated recognition. A young woman asks whether this is the final car for the branch by the canal. It is not. He tells her there is one more behind them, if the spacing has recovered. She says thank you with visible relief, and he hopes the spacing has indeed recovered enough that his answer was kind and true, rather than kind and merely probable. Tram work is full of these modest uncertainties. People ask for practical certainty. Workers often have only the most likely version of it to give. By the time the line turns toward the depot district again, the city has become a field of reflections. Street lamps lie in the wet rails as if poured there. Windows hold their own yellow squares above blackened pavement. The overhead wire is hard to see now, but the current still declares itself in the feel of movement and the occasional thin singing note at a curve. The conductor has spent all day in the company of this system, close enough to its ordinary failures that its larger marvel hardly presents itself. Yet it is there. A car full of tired strangers moving through rain and dark by electric power, across a city whose habits are still adjusting to the very routine it now takes for granted. Modernity often feels most ordinary to the people required to maintain its ordinary character. At the last busy stop before the quieter depot approach, a clerk boards in haste and asks whether this line still honors the morning transfer from the old route number. The question is almost absurd by now, arriving so late in the day, and yet of course it arrives. Not everyone encountered the change at sunrise. For some, the revision begins only now, at 1:30 evening, in wet shoes under a lamp. The conductor says no, that number was withdrawn this morning. The clerk grimaces, pays, and says the notice at his office porter standstill lists the old route. There is no surprise left in the conductor for such news. He only says that the board on this car has been wrong since dawn, and that the depot will hear of it again. The clerk gives a thin laugh that carries no pleasure, only recognition, and then steps further inside as the tram starts. That is how the day keeps ending and not ending. One more rider arrives at the edge of the shift with a question that properly belonged to the morning. One more explanation is lifted into place by the same tired voice. One more small patch is laid over the city's fresh crack. By the time the last cluster of evening passengers thins away, the conductor's notebook has become more valuable than the printed notice that began the day. The printed notice told him what ought to happen. The notebook tells what did. When the car finally reaches the depot approach, the streets are quieter than they were at dawn, but not in the same way. Morning quiet has expectation in it. Evening quiet has spent force. The tram enters the yard with wet wheels and tired lamps, and the rails there seem almost private again. He steps down carefully, because even now the board is slick, and a foolish slip at the end of a long shift would feel larger than it is. The driver stays with the car. The conductor goes where his kind of work always ends, not at the platform, not in public memory, but under indoor light with numbers waiting. The depot office smells of damp wool, ink, metal filings, and the old dust of paper handled by many hands. A clerk at the desk has already loosened his collar. Another is stacking transfer stubs into little squared bundles with the patience of a bookbinder. A lamp burns low on the ledger table, and in that yellow circle the whole confused day is expected to become straight. The conductor unhooks the leather bag and lays it down. Coins have a different sound at night. In the morning they promise movement. At night they sound like proof. He empties them in stages, the larger silver first, then the smaller pieces, then the coppers that stick a little from damp. The clerk begins counting without asking how many arguments, hesitations, and exceptions each stack contains. That is not his fault. Officers can only receive what officers are built to receive. Beside the coins go the punch ticket remnants, the used transfer stubs, the route card, the lantern, and at last the incorrect destination board report spoken aloud once more. Wrong wording still mounted on the revised line. Misled riders throughout the day. Repeated disputes caused by old wording under new number. The clerk writes it down neatly. Not dramatically, just a short note in a margin reserved for equipment and signage irregularities. The conductor watches the sentence disappear into the page. It is true. It is also smaller than the day felt. Then comes the matter of discrepancies, the quiet heart of evening reckoning. The cash is close but not smooth. Morning lenience and afternoon strictness have left their trace in the expected totals. Not enough to suggest dishonesty, enough to require explanation. The clerk asks in a neutral voice where the uncertainty began, and the conductor, who has spent all day translating the route for strangers, now translates the day for the office. He explains the old transfer colors accepted early on some cars. He explains the noon instruction to enforce the revision exactly. He explains the repeated wrong boardings caused by the unchanged destination board. He explains that riders paid in mixed categories because they were following yesterday's habits on today's line. As he speaks, the notebook comes out. It is damp at the corners and bent where it has ridden against his coat all day. The pencil line is cramped, sometimes faint, sometimes pressed deep where the car lurched. Still, the notes have order. Stops are named, patterns are marked. Disputes repeat in places the printed plan did not anticipate. The clerk takes the notebook, and for the first time all day, someone in the system sees the route as a sequence of lived difficulties, rather than a clean municipal revision. That is the small reveal waiting at the end. His notes are useful, not admirable in any grand sense, not praised, useful. The clerk copies several entries into the route adjustment file, market stop name disputed, old board wording still mounted. Transfer confusion strongest at the arcade, fabric shops, and machine shop stretch. Rain increasing missed landmarks and wrong alightings. Morning lenience creating afternoon resentment. The office accepts all of it with the calm appetite of administration. Useful facts are absorbed. The hand that gathered them is less important. He is not asked to sign the file. The remarks are entered under the line, the date, the revision, not under his name. This is the quietest part of the answer. Not that no one noticed the trouble. They did. Not that his record had no value. It has value at once. But the system stores difficulty by category, not by the patience that held it together. The clerk even thanks him in a decent and tired way, then turns the page. Already the notes are becoming part of tomorrow's corrected routine rather than evidence of today's human strain. The conductor could object if he were a different sort of man. He could say that he, not the office, spent the day carrying the revision in his throat and hands. He could ask that his observations be attached to his badge number. He could insist, gently or not, that good judgment deserves a name beside it. But there is another kind of dignity, smaller and older. He chooses that. He only points out one more thing, that if the wrong board remains on the car by morning, the whole confusion will breed again before sunrise. The clerk writes this down too. Then the accounts are closed. He cleans the punch before putting it away. This is a habit from many evenings, and perhaps the most private of the depot rituals. A ticket punch, after a wet day, holds paper dust and moisture in its little jaws. If left so, it bites poorly tomorrow. So he wipes it with a rag, works the hinge once or twice, and makes sure the mouth closes cleanly. The action is plain. Still, there is comfort in it. A tool restored to readiness is a kind of answer to disorder. His cap comes off next. The badge, dulled by rain and handling, catches the lamp for one brief second. Then it is only metal again. He folds the notebook and slips it back into his coat, though its contents have already been copied. Perhaps he keeps it because the office file is too clean. Perhaps because the original, with its crooked pencil and softened edges, still feels closer to the truth. Outside, the depot yard has grown quieter. A few men speak low beside another car. Somewhere a broom passes over wet boards. Water drips from the eaves with a steadier rhythm than the bells ever had. The city beyond the wall continues, of course, but at this hour, the tramway has withdrawn from being a public room and become machinery at rest. He walks home through streets that have stopped asking things of him. That difference matters. All day, every face turned toward the uniform for direction, permission, refusal, reassurance. Now the coat is only a coat. The cap is carried, not worn. No one on the pavement knows how many small confusions he kept from turning larger. The overhead wires hum faintly in the damp, and the sound is easy to miss unless you've spent years under it. At one stop, he passes the sign that caused so much trouble. In the weak light, it looks almost innocent. A board with a word on it. A modest municipal object. Tomorrow, it may be corrected. If it is corrected, then today's irritation will lose its cause. The city will move as if it had always meant to move this way. That is what order does when it is repaired. It erases the memory of the repairman first. He pauses only a moment there, not out of sentiment, but from the plain fatigue that makes any stillness welcome. Then he walks on. You can understand the whole title of the story in that walk. Nobody remembers the Milan Tram Conductor of the 1910s because he worked at the seam between confusion and normal life. When the seam held, people arrived, paid, changed cars, complained a little, and then forgot. The maps remained, the wires remained, the routes were revised again and again after that. Names changed, numbers changed, companies changed, cars themselves changed shape. But the labor of saying, no, not that stop now, this one, or yes, your sister should change at the arcade, or step carefully, the board is wet. That labor dissolved into the flow it made possible. Cities keep the structure and lose the voice. And so his day, which felt full enough to fill a life while he was in it, is reduced almost at once. A corrected sign, a balanced ledger, a route note in a file, a morning of disputes smoothed flat into procedure. At home, there is no grand ceremony of return. Jobs like his do not train a man to expect one. He hangs the damp coat. He sets the cap where it can dry without losing its shape. He places the gloves near the stove, fingers parted slightly so the wet can leave them by morning. If there is bread, he eats bread. If there is soup, it is welcome for its heat more than its flavor. The body asks for simple things after a day of being public: warmth, dryness, silence. And yet even in this quieter room, the route has not fully left him. A stop name returns. A rider's phrase repeats. But this morning, they told me you'd say no. Still the wrong wording. The day continues for a little while in fragments after duty ends. Then, slowly, even that fades. This is the last gentle consequence. He does not become bitter. He does not make a speech against the office, or the city, or the passengers who never learned his name. He prepares to go back. That is what such work taught. Return matters more than climax. A city depends less on memorable heroics than on men who can wake early, take up the punch, and do again what was done yesterday, only a little better, a little cleaner, with one fewer wrong sign above the window. If tomorrow's board is corrected, fewer people will ask questions. If fewer people ask questions, the line will run closer to time. If the line runs closer to time, riders will think the system has improved, and in a sense it will have. But the improvement will already have swallowed the evidence of who carried the awkward day before it. That is why memory leaves him behind. Not because he failed, because he succeeded in making strain look ordinary. Because his best work was to absorb friction until others could pass through the city without noticing it. Because modern life loves what functions and rarely pauses over the functioning hands. The room grows quieter, the coat drips less, the gloves begin to lose their chill. Outside, somewhere beyond the window, another late tram passes on another street, its sound softened by damp air and distance. Perhaps another conductor is still clipping the last fares of a revised line. Perhaps another wrong sign is still hanging over another platform. Perhaps somewhere in an office a clerk is writing down the issue without writing down the man. None of this is tragic. It is only common. And common things are often the first to vanish from memory. By morning, the notebook will go back into the pocket, the punch will fit the hand again, the rails will smell of damp metal before dawn, the yard will wake. A new set of strangers will step aboard believing the city simply works. And the conductor, if the sign has been changed, will have a quieter day because of labor already spent and almost